Chicken pot pie. Few dishes carry as much weight as the chicken pot pie, and what makes it even more interesting is that the Americans who turned it into a cultural icon didn't actually invent it. The roots stretch back to medieval Europe, where meat pies were less about flavor and more about preservation. You packed meat into a pastry crust, sealed it, and it lasted longer. Practical, not poetic. The British refined it over centuries, developed their own deep dish style, and when settlers crossed the Atlantic, the recipe came with them. But somewhere along the way, America made it theirs. They stripped out the bottom crust, added a thick, creamy gravy instead of a drier filling, and leaned hard into the comfort factor. The result was something richer, heavier, and far more indulgent than anything the British had been eating. At its core, it's a simple thing. Chunks of roasted chicken, carrots, peas, celery, onion, all pulled together in a thick, buttery gravy made from a roux, chicken stock, and a splash of cream. That filling gets poured into a dish and sealed under a golden pastry crust, flaky, rich, and just sturdy enough to hold everything underneath it. By the 20th century, chicken pot pie was everywhere. Brands like Stouffer's and Banquet figured out that if you could freeze it, you could sell millions of them. And they did. Today, hundreds of millions of individual pot pies are sold every year in the United States alone, sitting in every supermarket for $2 to $4 a piece, or family-sized for $8 to $12. Even KFC had a version on its menu for years. That tells you everything about how deeply embedded this dish became in everyday American life. Fast, cheap, filling, requires almost no effort. In a country that invented fast food, that combination is basically a formula for immortality. Shepherd's pie. Shepherd's pie doesn't have a crust, which confuses people who expect one, but that's exactly what makes it interesting. Instead of pastry, you get a thick layer of mashed potato on top, browned in the oven until it's golden and slightly crisp at the edges. Underneath is minced lamb cooked with vegetables and rich gravy. The name is straightforward: shepherd. Lamb. If you swap the lamb for beef, it becomes a cottage pie, and that distinction matters a great deal to anyone who grew up eating it in Britain or Ireland. The dish was born in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, right when potatoes were becoming a staple crop across the British Isles. It was practical food, designed to stretch leftover roasted meat into another full meal for a working-class family. Nothing was wasted. The potatoes were cheap and filling, the meat was already cooked, and the whole thing could be assembled quickly and put in the oven. It wasn't glamorous, but it fed people. Today you find it in nearly every traditional pub across the UK and Ireland. Chains like Wetherspoons carry it as a permanent fixture. Supermarket versions from Tesco and Birdseye fill freezer aisles, though most people will tell you those pale next to a homemade version. The global market for frozen shepherd's pie was valued at around $1.2 billion in 2024, which is remarkable for a dish invented to use up scraps. Steak and Guinness pie. Ireland has always had a close relationship with beef, and an even closer one with Guinness. At some point, someone decided to combine the two inside a pastry case, and the result became one of the most satisfying things in the entire pie world. The steak and Guinness pie is exactly what it sounds like. Chunks of beef braised low and slow in a dark sauce made with the famous stout, then sealed under a lid of golden puff pastry. The Guinness is not a gimmick. It deepens the sauce with a bitterness that balances the richness of the meat, helps break down the collagen over hours of cooking, and creates a gravy that tastes completely unlike anything made with stock or wine. This pie came out of a culture where the pub was central to daily life, and beer was simply part of the pantry. You cooked with what you had, and in Ireland, what you had included stout. The slow braised method also made tough, cheap cuts of beef edible, and eventually extraordinary. You can trace the spirit of this pie back centuries, to a time when most households were cooking over open hearths and the goal was to make the most of every ingredient. Today, it's a fixture in Irish pubs around the world. Not just the island itself. You'll find versions of it from Dublin to Melbourne to Boston, carried along by the Irish diaspora and their habit of building a pub wherever they settled. Pork pie. The British pork pie is eaten cold, which already sets it apart from nearly everything else on this list. It's a dense, compact thing, coarsely ground pork pressed into a thick, sturdy hot water crust pastry, then filled with a layer of savory jelly that forms as the pie cools. You slice it and eat it at room temperature, ideally with mustard and pickles. The idea of eating a warm, freshly baked pork pie is almost beside the point. It was designed that way on purpose. The origins trace to 18th century England, and more specifically to the town of Melton Mowbray in Leicestershire, which remains so proud of its version that it carries protected status, the same kind of geographical certification you see on champagne or Parma ham. Back then, it was food for the hunt. Aristocrats and their companions would be out on horseback all day, and they needed something portable, robust, and high in calories. The thick crust acted as packaging. The jelly helped preserve the meat and keep it moist. You could ride all day with a pork pie in your saddlebag and it would still be perfectly edible come lunchtime. Over time, it moved from the estates of the wealthy to the picnic baskets of everyone else. Today, brands like Melton Mowbray and supermarket chains like Tesco and Sainsbury's sell them in enormous quantities. It remains one of the most quintessentially British things you can eat: Australian meat pie. If you want to understand the Australian meat pie, start with the fact that it's sold at petrol stations and considered entirely normal. This is a country that took the British tradition of the meat pie, made it smaller, made it cheaper, made it faster, and turned it into a national fast food. Not the burger, not fish and chips, the pie. British colonists brought the concept with them in the 19th century, but Australia transformed it. The modern version is a small individual pie, roughly the size of your fist, filled with minced or diced beef in a thick brown gravy, with a short crust base and a flaky puff pastry lid. You eat it standing up, usually at a football match, holding it in a paper bag to catch the dripping gravy, with a line of tomato sauce squeezed across the top. Some people bite the lid off first and pour the sauce directly inside. The method is debated with genuine seriousness. Over 250 million of them are sold in Australia every year. They appear at AFL and NRL matches as reliably as the crowd itself. The brand 4 and 20 has been making them since 1947 and is as embedded in Australian culture as anything else you could name. There are annual competitions to determine who makes the best one. It is, without exaggeration, a national obsession. Cornish pasty. The Cornish pasty may be the most thoughtfully engineered food ever created for the working class. It was made for miners in Cornwall, and every physical feature of it was designed with their daily reality in mind. The filling is simple: beef, potato, turnip, and onion, seasoned and raw when assembled, then baked inside a half moon of short pastry. The edge is sealed with a thick, crimped rope of pastry along the curved side. That crimp is the detail that people remember. Miners in Cornwall were working in conditions involving arsenic, copper, and coal dust. Their hands were filthy. The crimped edge served as a handle. You held the pie by the thick rope of pastry, worked your way around the filling from one end to the other, and when you reached the crust you'd been gripping, you didn't eat it. You threw it away. In some versions, the pasty was even divided in two, with a savory meat filling at one end and a sweet fruit filling at the other, so a miner had an entire meal, main course and dessert, in one sealed package. Practical design genius from the 18th century. The Cornish pasty carries protected geographical status today. Miners who emigrated to Australia, South Africa, and the United States brought the recipe with them, which is why you find versions of it in places with no obvious connection to Cornwall. Greggs sells a modern version across the UK, but the original, made properly in Cornwall, is something else entirely: tourtière. Quebec has been making tourtière since the 1600s, which makes it one of the oldest recipes on this list. French colonists brought the idea of a meat pie from Europe, and it evolved over centuries into something completely specific to the region. The filling is usually pork, beef, or game, depending on what was available, seasoned with cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg. That combination sounds unusual if you're used to savory pies, but in Quebec it tastes like Christmas, which is precisely when this pie is meant to be eaten. The spices had a practical function originally. They masked the flavor of meat that wasn't perfectly fresh, helped with preservation, and gave the pie an aroma associated with the winter feast. Over time, the practical became traditional, and the traditional became sacred. Today in Quebec, no Christmas table is complete without a tourtière. It's served after midnight mass, shared at family gatherings, and argued over endlessly, because every family has their own version, and every family believes theirs is correct. The name itself probably comes from the vessel it was traditionally cooked in, a round earthenware dish called a tourte. It was made in large quantities, fed entire households, and kept well in the deep cold of a Quebec winter. The dish is over 300 years old and still being made the same way. That's a strong recipe. Pastilla. Pastilla is the most sophisticated thing on this list. It's a Moroccan dish that layers shredded chicken or pigeon with ground almonds, eggs, and a warming blend of cinnamon and saffron. all wrapped in tissue-thin worka pastry, then dusted with powdered sugar and more cinnamon before serving. Sweet on top, savory inside. With that particular combination that medieval Arab cuisine understood better than almost anyone, the contrast between the two makes each flavor more vivid. The recipe arrived in Morocco from Andalusia during the 13th through 15th centuries, carried by Muslim scholars and refugees. The sophistication of that Andalusian culinary tradition never really left North Africa, and pastilla is one of the clearest surviving examples. The original version used squab, considered the most delicate of meats, because this was not everyday food. It was a dish for royal tables and celebration banquets. You still don't eat pastilla on a Tuesday night. It appears at weddings, at Eid celebrations, at meals where someone wants to make an impression. Preparation takes 2 to 3 hours at minimum. The worka pastry requires a skill that few people outside Morocco still practice. The whole production is a statement. When a Moroccan family puts pastilla on the table, they're telling you something about how much you matter. Salteñas. Salteñas are arguably the trickiest pastry in the world. From the outside, you get a thick baked crust, golden, slightly sweet, with that distinctive pinched seam running along the top. But inside, it's almost soup. Chunks of meat, potato, hard-boiled egg, olives, and raisins, all suspended in a filling that's been deliberately gelatinized before baking. When it hits the heat of the oven, that gelatin melts. So by the time it reaches you, the inside is liquid. The name comes from a woman from Salta, Argentina, who brought the recipe into Bolivia, where it took root, evolved, and became something entirely its own. A mix of Spanish, indigenous, and South American influences folded into one handheld pastry. Bolivia claimed it, and Bolivia perfected it. Here's what makes saltes truly unique. They're a morning food. In Bolivia, you find them between 7 and 11. After that, they're basically gone. The vendors sell out, the shops close, and that's it until tomorrow. They're filling, rich, and heavy enough to carry you through the day, which is exactly why nobody eats them for dinner.